Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, November 30th, 2023. All right, so the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, the U.S. reaffirms that there are no conditions on military aid to Israel. So senior U.S. officials speaking to Politico on Wednesday have reaffirmed that the Biden administration intends to place no conditions on future military aid to Israel, despite public comments suggesting the idea was under consideration. So amid growing calls from Democrats to condition military aid to Israel, President Biden told reporters recently that the idea is a worthwhile thought, but U.S. officials are saying it will not happen, saying that it is not something the U.S. is currently pursuing. And these comments from Biden that it's something worth thinking about must have set off some alarm bells in Israel and among hawks in the U.S., because you have all these officials now saying, no, don't worry about it. It's still unconditional, which is really something if you think about it. There's absolutely no conditions on these weapons that we're sending to Israel. No matter what they do, we're going to keep doing it. Doesn't matter. And these comments come, the comments walking back what Biden said, they come as we're seeing all these reports that say the U.S. is trying to pressure Israel on its campaign in the south. Once the hostage deal truce resumes, they're expected to expand military operations in southern Gaza, where there's hundreds of thousands of displaced Palestinians who fled the north. So Gaza in the south is even more densely populated than normal. So the civilian casualties are expected to be even worse than what we saw in the past, month and a half, almost 2 months now. So anyway, we're seeing all these reports saying, and also public comments from Biden officials saying that we're not going to support their campaign in the South if they don't take account for the civilians that are there. But at the same time, it's unconditional, so it doesn't really matter. So you are going to support it, whether you say you are or not, because you're funding this military. And there's no sign that the administration is willing to use any leverage over Israel. And you have the Israeli defense minister and other officials saying that once the military operations resume, they're going to be bigger than ever before. So there was also another kind of strange tweet from Biden on Tuesday where which suggested he might support a real ceasefire in Gaza as opposed to a pause or a truce, a temporary stop during this hostage deal. He wrote on X, obviously he didn't write it, somebody on his staff wrote on X, quote, "To continue down the path of terror, violence, killing, and war is to give Hamas what they seek. We can't do that," end quote. So many people took Biden's comments or his post as a significant shift in rhetoric, potentially as a change in policy towards supporting a real ceasefire. But a senior administration official told Jewish Insider that it was not a change in policy and that the U.S. would continue to support the Israeli onslaught, saying that it should be the last war. So this official said, quote, "We want this to be the last war, and we recognize that for that to happen, Hamas can't be the governing authority. They have to be out of power because if you have Hamas in power, you're likely going to have another conflict," end quote. So saying the U.S. is with Israel until the end of the last war. And according to the latest estimates from Gaza's media office, which as far as I understand it are not as accurate, not as confirmed. They could be accurate. They could be a low estimate, but not as confirmed as the numbers that come from Gaza's health ministry, which has not been putting out regular updates since November 10th. But the media office is saying over 15,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza so far, including over 6,000 children. And again, because of the concentration of the displaced Palestinians in the south, we're looking at worse civilian casualties once things really ramp up there. And Israel has continued to bomb the south, not during this truce that's been holding since Friday, but after telling Palestinians to evacuate to the south, they continued to bomb locations down there. All right, so the next one here. Negotiations are underway in Qatar to extend Gaza truce. So intense negotiations are underway in Qatar aimed at extending the truce between Israel and Hamas that's due to expire on Thursday. The initial 4-day truce began on Friday and was extended for 2 days. And despite reports of minor clashes, the pause in fighting has held relatively well, and the two sides have continued to exchange prisoners. Late Wednesday, could have been early Thursday morning, they did a exchange. Hamas released 16 hostages. Israel released another 30 Palestinian prisoners. And so when I'm recording this, it's Thursday morning in Gaza. This could change right after I record this, but according to Al Jazeera, the current negotiations being mediated by Qatar are focused on how long the truce will be extended and how many hostages and prisoners will be released. The temporary ceasefire is expected to be extended for another few days. That's what they're expecting. Again, this news could break very soon, at any time, really. Or we could learn that airstrikes resumed. So while the temporary thing is expected to extend a little bit, there's no sign of any lasting deal being negotiated. Israel continues to vow to expand its military operations. Netanyahu made comments like that again on Wednesday. Previous reports have said that the longest Israel is willing to pause this war is 10 days. So it's been 6 days. 10 days would bring us through the weekend if they did another 4, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is headed to the region, and he told reporters he was in Brussels on Wednesday. He's headed to the Middle East now. He said once he gets there, the U.S. is going to push for more pauses, as they call them. They don't want to use the C word for ceasefire. He said, quote, "Looking at the next couple of days, we'll be focused on doing what we can and to extend the pause so we can continue to get more hostages out and more humanitarian assistance in," end quote. Hamas officials have said they are looking for a deal to release Israeli men and military personnel. So far, it's been women and children, and they want a lot more prisoners for the military hostages. So that's what they're looking at. But again, it seems like Israel is eager to restart this war. All right, so the next one here, Israel left premature babies to die alone in a Gaza hospital. So this is one of those stories I saw, and I just can't imagine it being true. But this is based on a report from Al Mashhad TV, which is based in Dubai. And it says basically that this children's hospital in Gaza there was 5 premature babies who were left to die when the hospital was forced to evacuate. I'll just read the article here. It's pretty horrific. Premature babies were left to die in an intensive care unit in one of Gaza's hospitals after medical staff were forced to evacuate by the Israeli forces, according to a chilling video report by Al Mashhad TV. The disturbing footage was recorded in the aftermath of Israel's siege on the Al Nasser Children's Hospital in western Gaza, as the pause in the fighting brought to the forefront the scale of Israel's destruction in the Strip. Remember that report from Politico that said the U.S. was worried that the pause in fighting would give journalists more access to shine a light on the atrocities Israel has committed in Gaza. So this footage, the equipment to support the babies, can be seen attached to their beds, with the video edited to blur out the bodies of the babies, which were described as decomposing. So that's the footage that they have. And one thing that I guess doesn't confirm that this story is true, but one thing that adds to the evidence that this is probably a real report is the fact that when Israel made the medical staff evacuate this hospital, there was reports at the time, multiple reports at the time, including from Doctors Without Borders, saying that medical workers had been forced to abandon 5 premature babies at this hospital. So they were forced to leave them behind, and now it looks like they were just left to die, which is just horrific. So I'll see I haven't seen Israel respond to this yet. I mean, this report is all over the place. So, we'll see what Israel has to say. And, it became, when there was all the controversy at the I forget the name of the hospital, Al-Ali Hospital. It was the Christian hospital that there was that big bombing of it that killed a lot of people, and Israel denied it. And they said at the time, we don't attack hospitals. But since then, I mean, how many hospitals have they attacked? Can't even keep track of it anymore. All right, so the next story here, Smotrich says that the West Bank is home to 2 million Nazis. So Bezalel Smotrich, the extremist Israeli minister in charge of the West Bank, has said the occupied territory is home to 2 million Nazis, referring to part of the Palestinian population. So it's estimated that there's around 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank. And the Times of Israel first reported on these comments from Smotrich, and they said that he made them in an apparent reference to two polls that found 2/3 of West Bank Palestinians supported the October 7th Hamas attack on southern Israel. I looked at the polls that the Times of Israel referenced, and they actually surveyed Palestinians living in Gaza and the West Bank. So it's not clear exactly if that was what Smotrich was talking about here. And the polls also came... This got me looking at polls, so then I found another interesting one. And keep in mind, if these Palestinians are saying that they support the attack on October 7th, it comes after weeks and weeks of this brutal bombing campaign in Gaza, and of course this huge uptick in violence in the West Bank, which has killed over 200 Palestinians so far just since October 7th, which is more than died in the West Bank all of last year. So based on a poll that was actually taken on October 6th, before the October 7th Hamas attack and the Israeli response, there was actually a lot of mistrust when it came to Hamas among Palestinians in Gaza. So again, conducted on October 6th, and this poll found that 67% of Palestinians in Gaza either had no trust at all, which was 44% of them, or not a lot of trust, which is 23% in Hamas. So 67 total, not very trusting of Hamas. And that same poll found that 73% of Gazans favored a peaceful solution to the conflict with Israel. So that poll kind of goes against the Israeli narrative, and it's just a poll. Polls don't always tell you the real story, but if they're going to look at these polls about, the Palestinians supporting the October 7th attack, I think it's important to point that poll out. So anyway, back to Smotrich, who's the leader of the religious Zionism party. He also referenced Nazis in the West Bank in comments on Twitter or X in response to a Fatah official saying that the October 7th Hamas attack did not happen in a vacuum. And Smotrich wrote, quote, "A reminder to those who have not yet sobered up and think that the Nazis in Judea and Samaria are different than the Nazis in Gaza," end quote. And there, Judea and Samaria, he's using the biblical name for the West Bank. So Smotrich, who is a West Bank settler himself, he serves as the finance minister in Netanyahu's government, but he was also given a position in the defense ministry where he has power to approve new settlement construction and to make it even more difficult for Palestinians to build new homes, basically making it impossible if it wasn't already. So this gives him an enormous amount of power, and it's unprecedented. This was previously... The military had control over this stuff, and this is a civilian minister, again, a settler, a guy who explicitly wants to annex the entire West Bank. And I put in a quote here from an Associated Press report that I thought was interesting, describing what Smotrich and his supporters, what their views are. And it says that they, quote, "envision a single state from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, in which Palestinians can live quietly with second-class status or leave," end quote. So that is what Smotrich wants. He actually wrote a paper in 2017 when he was new to the Knesset, and it outlined an idea for the full Israeli annexation of the West Bank called the Decisive Plan. And this plan essentially gives the Palestinians in the West Bank three options: leave the West Bank for an Arab country, accept Israeli rule and life as a second-class citizen, or resist and be killed. So, and this paper was very controversial, considered very extreme, in Israel. And now this guy is in charge of the West Bank, essentially. And, he was appointed to this position in December 2022. And since then, violence has surged and settlements have been expanding at a much faster rate. And that has all increased again, not so much, the approving the construction and stuff, but since October 7th, you've had settlers throwing people out of their homes, threatening to kill them, burning their houses down, and all of this is really ramping up. And this is what these people in the Netanyahu government ultimately want, is they want all the Palestinians out, or to just accept, subjugation. All right, so the next one here, Security Minister Ben-Gvir threatens to quit the cabinet if war stops. So this is another one of the controversial members of Netanyahu's coalition government, Itamar Ben-Gvir, and Netanyahu relied on these guys to form a government, and now he is threatening to break apart the governing coalition if Israel's war on Gaza stops. He said, quote, "Stopping the war equals breaking apart the government," end quote. And he said that in a post on X. So Ben-Gvir, he's the leader of the Jewish Power Party. And when Israel's cabinet voted on the hostage deal and the truce, his party was the only one to oppose it. Smotrich actually supported it, and his religious Zionism party supported it. And these are two minor, smaller parties when it comes to the coalition. I believe in Ben-Gvir's party, it's only 3 ministers who have a vote in the cabinet. So only 3 voted against the idea, but that's just, you get an idea of the position. And it's not clear if Ben-Gvir leaves, if it would result in the collapse of the ruling coalition. Netanyahu, amid this war, might be able to find some support, and he also did form a war cabinet. I'm not sure exactly how that works, and I know Gantz is in there, which was one of his opposition figures. So, it's not clear if Ben-Gvir does do something like this, if it would mean an end to the current governing coalition, but it would certainly threaten their hold on power. All right. So the next one here, Israeli army labels Jenin a closed military zone. So this article is from The Cradle, and again, this violence in the West Bank has really increased, and the Israeli army designated the occupied West Bank city of Jenin and its refugee camp as a closed military zone on the 29th of November, as another round of brutal overnight raids and heavy clashes extended into the morning. Palestinian news agency Wafa reported that Israel declared the city of Jenin and its camp a closed military zone and deployed forces with large reinforcements across several neighborhoods. Local sources say Israeli forces stormed Jenin refugee camp on Tuesday night, launching a massive campaign of arrests across its eastern neighborhood, resulting in the outbreak of violent confrontations between troops and resistance fighters. The clashes remained ongoing in the following day, and several Palestinians have been injured. Wafa added that the army's bulldozers continue to intentionally destroy infrastructure across the camp, coinciding with heavy drone flights overhead. The destruction centered on Al-Damj and Al-Samran neighborhoods, and further damage was inflicted on the camp's roads and water and sewage networks. There was also a drone strike. So this is all going on in the West Bank as... Still, the truce did not apply to the West Bank, and things seem to just be getting worse and worse there. All right, so the next one here, polls show that Zelensky might lose an election to Valery Zaluzhny. So The Economist reported on Tuesday that internal polling in Ukraine shows that Zelensky could lose a presidential election if he faces off with General Valery Zaluzhny, who's the Ukrainian commander-in-chief. So far, Zaluzhny has not expressed an interest in entering into politics, but he's been rumored to be a potential candidate for a long time. I feel like for the past year, I've seen these kind of rumors that Zaluzhny is a potential opponent of Zelensky if there ever is a election. And it's also been reported that Zaluzhny and Zelensky have been at odds with each other, and this spat spilled out into the public recently after Zaluzhny was very candid about the situation on the battlefield. He called the war against Russia a stalemate, said there would likely be no deep and beautiful breakthrough. So there's a quote here from Zelensky that I actually missed, and he took a pretty, a swipe at Zaluzhny and other generals for saying things like that, and it's strange. So Zelensky said, quote, "If a military man decided to do politics, it is his right. Then he should enter politics, and then he can't deal with war," end quote. So basically saying, shut up, Zaluzhny. And, he's not really talking politics. He's talking about the situation on the battlefield. He is Ukraine's top general. So I'm sure that did not sit right with Zaluzhny. And polling shows that Ukrainian public trust is much higher when it comes to Zaluzhny. They trust Zaluzhny much more than Zelensky, according to these polls that were viewed by The Economist. And the report reads that the figures, which date from mid-November, show that trust in the president has fallen to a net plus 32%. So these are a net percentage. So that doesn't mean that it's only 32%. I forget exactly how it's worked out, but it's like they subtract the people who don't trust Zelensky from the people who do, the percentage of people who do, and they get that number 32%. But so Zaluzhny is plus 32%. Zaluzhny is plus 70%. So that's more than double what Zelensky is. And Ukraine's spy chief, Kirilo Budanov, who's responsible for a lot of the assassinations that we're seeing, he also has a better rating than the president at plus 45%. So Ukraine's next presidential election is scheduled for March 2024, but Zelensky has ruled out holding one during the war because Ukraine's constitution prohibits holding a vote under martial law. So that's the excuse that Zelensky is using, because he himself previously suggested that he could hold an election if the West foots the bill. And he said that they could change the constitution. You just gotta pay for it. You gotta give us a few more $1 billion. But he has since ruled out that idea. Recently, earlier in November, he said that elections are not appropriate at this time. And for now, an important point here is that according to these polls that The Economist reported on, the Ukrainian public actually agrees with Zelensky that they shouldn't hold elections. The poll says that 8 out of 10 Ukrainians are against holding elections right now, but of course that could change as the war drags on and there's no end or victory in sight. So it's interesting because Zaluzhny, the guy who has run this war from the military side, he could be the man to end the war. You know, if, say, he does become president, he's definitely in a position where he could do it. A change in leadership is probably something needed for the Ukrainian political leadership to say, all right, enough is enough here. Let's switch things. Right now, it seems for Zelensky, he's just holding on. And I think he probably knows his political career will be over if he signs a deal with the Russians giving up territory, which at this point, Ukraine has no leverage over Russia. And it does seem to be Russia's attitude, as we've seen these talks of the U.S. and the West considering making Ukraine or pushing Ukraine to the negotiating table, that Russia's attitude right now is time's on our side. We're not going to make any compromises. We're going to just wait this thing out longer. All right, so the next one here, Senator Rand Paul to force a vote on Syria withdrawal. So this is some good news. This was reported by Responsible Statecraft on Wednesday, and it says that Senator Rand Paul is planning to force a vote on a resolution that he introduced to withdraw all U.S. troops from Syria, as U.S. bases in the country have come under frequent attack since mid-October. Paul introduced the resolution on November 15th, and it would order the removal of the approximately 900 U.S. troops that are stationed in Syria within 30 days unless President Biden receives authorization for war from Congress. Sources told Responsible Statecraft that the vote could happen as early as next week. Earlier this year, Matt Gaetz, over in the House, he's a Republican from Florida, he introduced a similar resolution which failed pretty badly in a vote of 103 to 321. According to the Pentagon, there has been at least 73 attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria, including over 30 in Syria, so it's roughly half and half. So this is a good time, I think, for Rand Paul to force a vote on this when you have U.S. troops coming under constant attack. I wish more of these guys that, like Gaetz, people who have been good on this before, were more outspoken about the risk of the U.S. getting dragged into a war in the Middle East. But unfortunately, a lot of them are all about supporting and funding Israel, and all that stuff goes out the window when it comes to Israel, the whole ending wars thing. So it's good to see Rand Paul put this up. I'm not sure exactly where he stands on the whole Israel thing, how he's going to vote on the Israeli military aid. Hopefully he votes against it, but we'll see. I've seen some pretty bad comments from him in the media. But anyway, so hopefully there's a vote on this soon. This is definitely something we can call our senators to tell them to support. And there's been this lull in attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria since the Gaza truce has gone into effect. But they're saying Kateb Hezbollah and other Shia militias that have been behind some of the attacks are basically saying once things resume in Gaza, we're going to start attacking the U.S. again. So that shows that that's what this is all about, is the U.S. support for what Israel is doing in Gaza. And these groups also want to kick the U.S. out of Iraq and Syria. All right. So the last one here, which I'm sure you've all heard by now, Henry Kissinger is dead at 100 years old. So we have this article here from Spencer Ackerman at Rolling Stone that is very critical of Henry Kissinger for his role in, of course, the Vietnam War, specifically expanding the bombing campaign into Laos and Cambodia. I know in Cambodia, he's responsible for at least 150,000 civilian deaths. His biographer estimates that he's responsible for somewhere between 3 and 4 million deaths for his role in the Vietnam War and the coups in Latin America and backing Pinochet and other things that he's been involved with. And he died at 100. And he's one of those people who just never thought he would die. I mean, not that long ago, he was in China talking to Xi Jinping. At 100 years old, he traveled over there. So it's good to reflect on his legacy, and I'm sure we're going to have lots of pieces about this. Recently, Nick Turse, if you want to check this out, I think we ran it when he published it. He did some new reporting on the scale of what Kissinger was responsible for, specifically in Cambodia, just the horror. And, this is all stuff we have to remember because he's being kind of eulogized in a lot of media as, this great diplomat. And it's also worth pointing out, I always covered when he said things about the Ukraine war. It goes to show that the hawks today, the people in charge of our foreign policy, are so bad that they made Henry Kissinger seem reasonable in the last years and decades, really, of his life. But can't forget the horrors that he was behind previously. So, again, there's going to be lots to read about Henry Kissinger, I think, in the next few weeks. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Medea Benjamin and Nicholas J.S. Davies. Can the U.S. threats prevent a wider war in the Middle East? One from Jeffrey D. Sachs, A Framework for Peace in Israel and Palestine. One from Ted Snyder, NATO chief puts hypocrisy on full display. One from Patrick Lawrence, Media's Fatal Compromises. And our spotlight is from Gideon Levy. Children are children, whether in Israel or Gaza. They never deserve to die. So that is everything from me. You could always support this show at antiwar.com by sharing it, telling your friends about us, like and subscribe if you watch this on YouTube or Rumble or Odyssey. If you listen to the podcast, a lot of times you can leave a rating or a review or something like that. But I appreciate all the listeners and viewers of this show. I'll be back tomorrow with some more news. Tomorrow is the last show of the week. Yeah, that's right. It seems like it's been a quick week. All right, I will talk to you then. Thanks for listening.